And the system is a system that is not broken. It is working perfectly to the advantage of the 1%. That it is doing what it was built to do, which is to oppress a certain demographic of individuals.
Welcome to Sober Dad Crew, the podcast where we talk about all things sobriety, recovery, parenting, music, tattoos, work, and more. For more information, please visit soberdadcrew.com. All right, my guest this episode is Sarah Laurel, founder and executive director of Savage Sisters, which provides thoughtful, trauma-informed resources for those recovering from substance use disorder. The organization's work includes advocacy, outreach, and housing. Sarah, welcome to Sober Dad Crew.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So I first learned of your organization watching Blown Away. When Alex
with
Rosenberg,
Alex.
who I interviewed, who is super cool, who I guess it was their Christmas episode, he fundraised for you guys. And it was funny, when I interviewed him, he hadn't been super public about being sober. And then he was like, well, here we go. I mean, do we call it national TV, whatever, Netflix? He's like, well, now I'm out there. And I was like, well, I gotta like check out, what this group is all about. Can you let folks know, who's Savage Sisters? Where did that name come from? What do you do? My intro is very sterile, and I think what you do is way more compelling than that little intro.
Sure, absolutely. I came up with the name. It's visible right there. The dress that I was cut out of that says Savage on it.
Oh, yeah.
I was thrown out of a second-story window and then beaten and dragged to a vacant lot and left there for 18 hours. And there's more that happened in that situation, but I was unhoused and using substances in Kensington. And that was the dress that I was cut out of when I ended up rolling into recovery in my wheelchair. The only thing that I had with me was a clear plastic bag from the hospital with that bloody dress in it. And a friend of mine had a little house and said, do you want to make it a recovery house? I did not. I said, no, I'm literally here to get these staples out and then I'm going back to
got my dress.
Yeah,
I don't need anything else.
I'm just going to put this back on. Anyway, I said Savage Sisters. I didn't know, much else. And that's where the name comes from. And we went about our daily lives. And then in 2019, after dealing with some grief and trauma and a return to use, I went back to Kensington in a little studio apartment and started doing my outreach. So the harm reduction piece of it was very unintentional. And so now we do 13 outreaches a week. We have 2 mobile vans with where we do the outreaches from in different parts of the city and the county, 10 structured sober living homes, and we travel the country doing trainings. And we do drug checking as well, which is testing the supply. So that's who we are. Since then, those 2 friends that I started it with have passed away. So we do this work in their honor.
Yeah, you guys are officially badass. I mean, you just started the thing. I was saying this to my oldest, who's 22. I was like, take this organization. She really just started it. She just did the thing, right? You didn't have resources. You didn't have grant funding. You just walked out the door. You knew the problem because you lived the problem, which, you can walk those streets because people know you and know you understand, but you just did the thing. You didn't wait.
Yeah, I think it was, I always say, it was unintentional. I didn't start out thinking that it would be anything. I just wanted to help my friends because I lived on a corner that was a dope set. There were sex workers across the street. There was a dope set literally on my front stoop. And so I would sit out there and, talk to my friends and get them toiletries. And some of the women would come shower in my apartment and we would just kind of connect with each other. It was never it wasn't supposed to be this big thing, but I saw the need, and so then I have 10 siblings, and I was like, you guys have to come help me. And so they did, and I think that people want to help. I think people are constantly seeking a way to support the community, and they have different capacities. Some people donate money, some people donate time, some people donate their expertise from the medical field. And I think that we were just this little outfit of criminals that
Some
wanted
places
to.
you are, like,
um,
especially now.
and there wasn't like pomp and pretense to it. It was just show up, love people, give them free shit, keep it moving. And people can get behind that. And I believe that people want to help. They just need the avenue to do it.
Yeah, what was it that turned the corner for you to really get into recovery?
I didn't do that on purpose either. I couldn't move. So I was in a wheelchair. I think people have different levels of using substances, and mine had gotten incredibly dark, and I was in a lot of pain, and I was passively suicidal, if you will. I had no intention on changing my lifestyle. I thought, this is my lot in life. I will die with a syringe in my neck. And I had given into that. I really wasn't fighting that system. There were days where I would be like, I don't want to do this anymore, but I never had enough willpower to actually see that thought through. Um, and pain does two things, right? It hurts or it changes you. And the pain that happened when I was in that wheelchair and kind of stuck in that space was that I slowly changed. It wasn't an aha moment. I didn't stretch my arms out. I didn't see God. I didn't see Allah or Jesus. I just realized that I was capable of not using substances. And for so many years, I didn't think that that was a reality for me. So it was an unintentional slow change, and the pain that I had endured helped shift me.
Yeah, do you do any kind of program?
More. I did, though. I think the program helped me immensely in the beginning. I was very isolated and alone in the community aspect of it, and there were some really decent human beings that were in that program. Um, Doing the harm reduction work a few years later isolated me from a lot of people because there was a lot of judgment of doing a syringe program or doing drug checking, and there's this like mentality. But so I stepped away from it. I'm still abstinent. I think I have a very fulfilled life, but I do not affiliate myself with a 12-step fellowship.
Yeah, it's interesting, people's view on harm reduction. I mean, I just think dead people don't get better, right? Like, as a very base way to say it. And I was on the board. I live outside Ithaca of an organization, and we started a 40-bed detox. And, they had already been doing harm reduction, but, this place had handmade quilts on the bed, right? It was like human and real, because there are places out there that are basically, cash cows, right? And I thought, wow, these 40 beds, like, that's going to take 2 seconds to fill. Like, that's nothing not just for the city of Ithaca, but it was for a county region. And I think the resources are so thin for folks who want to get better, and it is complicated. And we've seen in this community, people build some housing without any support system. So my wife's a social worker and a therapist. So, like, we talk a lot about this. You can't just build a house for people, right? You got to some kind of services. And we've seen a couple examples in the Ithaca area where that's happened. They're like, well, look, you get a house now. Isn't that happy? But you haven't, like, put any systems in place to help people actually, like, change or get the services they need. It's hard to go from being, like, on the street to four walls around you.
Yeah, I think it's a huge transition, and I think there's always going to be heads in beds locations. I've been living in those. I think they're dangerous because you shouldn't have people under your care. if you aren't going to provide them certain resources, or if you don't, like, just saying I'm in recovery doesn't mean that you should have people under your care. Um, and we've seen that trend and we've seen it fail and we've seen it cause incredible harm to women, to men, to people in this very vulnerable space in their life. But I do believe that if you call on the outside resources, get them therapy, get them alternative, resources, get them tested for STIs and treated for things like Hep C and help them build a foundation that they can create a happy, fulfilling life off of, then I think that's good. But I don't think that there's enough attention on properties or owners of these recovery programs. And I think that it's become very bastardized and it's become exploited.
Yeah, and I think you see that a lot of places, and I've talked to other people, in recovery who are, very skeptical of a lot of inpatient treatment facilities for that very reason, that they're money makers. They're not, places to help humans. People in there, it's a billable.
The billable, that is the most infuriating part of all of this. And I understand the capitalistic lens that this has become. It's just that's what it is. It's very unfortunate. And so even parents seeking, where do I send my child? It's very difficult to tell because all the propaganda is there. They say all the right things on the websites, and you're putting, your loved one's life in the hands of somebody that you don't know. Um, so I always recommend that they do some research and that they don't go based off of the website, read the reviews, call them, see how the interactions are. I also say interventions are a hoax. Do not pay somebody to come in and coerce your loved one into treatment. You do not need anyone to help you get into rehab. You can call the rehab directly. Anybody telling you that there's a fee to do so is a scam.
Right.
Um, and also, you don't get them into rehab. They get themselves into treatment. If you're going to take credit for their recovery, then you must in turn take credit for their relapse. And I don't think you want to do either of those things. So you provide them the resources, the phone number, the modality to get there, and then you step back and allow adults to do what they want.
Yeah, and it's complicated because I get parents who, are feeling desperate, right, and would do anything for their kid, and it's, the heart of capitalism is taking advantage of people who are, desperate or, poor. We were having this conversation last night with my 13-year-old who's like, I just want to be rich, and I was like, being rich means there are people who are poor. It is a basic math equation. She's like, but wait, I said, I get wanting to like have cool things and I don't judge that. I'm just going to put out the math equation of capitalism for you, which means if there are rich people, there are poor people. I said to her, those $10 jeans at Target, what's the person sewing those jeans making? I mean, they're probably 10 years old, right? And making a penny a day or something. I said, if you're getting jeans at Target that have been shipped from across the world for $10 and the store's still making a profit on those, somebody in that supply chain is not making very much money. But we digress. I want to talk about Kensington a little bit. Yeah. So folks might, because this TV show was on recently, Long Bright River, of which the book I loved, and my wife and I, when we started dating, like read that together. We're both in recovery. A fabulous book, and made into a TV show. Takes place in the Kensington neighborhood. The sister's a police officer looking for her own sister is sort of the summary, who is in addiction. And I understand you consulted for that show.
I did. Liz Moore, who's the author of the book, and I met years ago. And originally, when we were connected, it was, I think, before she published the book. We were talking about substances and Kensington, and I lived there. And so she actually came with a different actress the first time years and years ago. And I met them and talked to them about like my journey. And then Amanda was cast for Mickey, and Ashley Cummings, who plays her sister Casey, spent a lot of time at my house and at our storefront. And then I mean, I got to see. They invited me to New York to see the filming of it. It's not really my scene. It was pretty cool, but you know, I I didn't have much feedback. I was like, "This is cool." Um, so I thought it was really interesting. I will say, Liz took a lot of time to ensure that the voices of the community were at the forefront, and my work was mainly with Ashley Cummings, who is a native of Australia. So she had a funny accent, and then she wanted to learn the Philly accent. And I was like, I don't know if that's doable. But she and I spent time together. She did outreach with me, like on the ground in Kensington, came to my house in Kensington, talked about what is this like, you know? And that's really all I did. I wasn't a part of like the filming of. I'm not an actress, so but it was cool.
Yeah, but I do appreciate, the arts taking the time to try and get it right, because it could have been a very different story. I mean, it has a sort of sensational, it's a murder mystery in the end too. More, I think, about family. I mean, I think what I really loved about that book was this notion of family, and the desperation to help your sister raising, your own kid as a single parent and all that. But yeah, I just wanted to bring that up because though I didn't realize it was filmed in New York, I guess they didn't film it in the neighborhood. Um,
I don't think they would have been able to. It's pretty deep. I don't think it's dangerous as a resident. I'm like, this is just what it is. But I don't know what it would have been like for them to try to film down there because it's very hectic at times. But they did it. I think they did a good job of it. I think that it's kind of woven into the story the way that family can be very complicated, and the duality of the roles that they play. And also, Amanda, her role was to kind of play this police officer. And when I was on set the one day, they were like, the one cop came over to me. I didn't realize he was an actor, and he said something to me, and I was like, bro, don't talk to me. And he was like, I'm not really a cop. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, because he had the Philly uniform on. And he was like,
yeah.
why would you react like that? And I said, well, in Philly,
Would you
like
like a
it's,
list?
and they said something to me, and I was like, bro, this is like for people like us in Philly, the cops, a lot of times, not all the time, but a lot of times aren't safe. Um, there isn't this like connection and bond that exists. But Amanda still managed to kind of bring that through the screen, which I was impressed by.
Yeah, and I think that relation of policing in America right now is super complex. I mean, with people of color, and now with everything that's happening with ICE impacting communities even greater, and basically police not showing badges and covering their faces and all this stuff, is this super extreme turn. I mean, policing was already problematic, and the history of policing is problematic, but it's even gotten worse. But I think people who have not walked those neighborhoods or lived those lives or talked to the folks do not understand what that's like. I lived on the south side of Chicago, and I could walk out. It was a 98% African American neighborhood, and I could walk out of that neighborhood through the University of Chicago, and I worked with at-risk youth. I ran this bike shop, and kids like learned to fix bikes. But those, black kids couldn't walk the same path that I could walk out of the neighborhood and not get hassled. I mean, I would get hassled because cops thought I was there to buy drugs. Because I like, why are you in this neighborhood? Or the grandmas are like, do you know where you are? And I had like purple hair back then. I was like this little punk kid. But you got to like walk those neighborhoods to understand. I mean, I get like people are afraid of some of those neighborhoods, but you got to like walk those neighborhoods. They're full of humans, chaotic or not. The people live there.
I think that living in Kensington, as because I was unhoused in Kensington and then a resident serving alongside, different people. And I think the residential aspect that a lot of people don't get to see is that these are families and there is a high probability, a high chance that they are involved in the drug trade. But it's how they put food on their table. It's not this crazy criminal chaotic thing that everybody puts on the news. That makes the news when it's chaotic. But on a consistent basis, there's a lookout, there's the dope set, there's the stash house, and everybody's making money in a way because it's a completely impoverished community and this is their business. This is how they live their lives. And they also are not inherently cruel to people who use substances. That's their customer base. When I was on house, they were nice to me. They gave out water ice. They would check on us. It was kind of like together. We worked together because they knew you need us just like we need you. And this is what this looks like. Obviously that shifts a little bit over time when the police come in and they start demonizing one particular group. And the group of people who use drugs are the ones who get demonized the most. They're zombies, they're junkies, they're losers. And those terms dehumanize us. And then you start removing that familial aspect, the residential community piece of it. And you just hyper focus on this unwanted demographic. And it empowers and emboldens police to behave with brutality.
And I think there's other kind of brutal forces out there. Gentrification is such a huge force. In most American cities, people can't see that Sarah just totally rolled her eyes because she knows where I'm going with this. And, I saw it when I lived in Chicago. I mean, Ithaca, New York is small, but I see it there. And the unhoused people, people at risk, not even unhoused people, but people with jobs who are just trying to like have a minimum wage job, but also have a place to live, because there's a huge percentage of people who do not make enough to pay rents. I mean, in Ithaca, New York, there's 2-bedroom apartments renting for $4,000 a month. It's crazy. Like, I have a good job. My wife has a good job. Our mortgage doesn't even begin to like near that level. It's insane. And so who lives there? So I'm guessing in a neighborhood like Kensington, those sort of capitalistic development forces are probably pushing around the margins and, pushing folks out, consolidating the problems because they want to develop those properties into, moneymakers.
Yeah, I think it's a calculated move. Real estate developers came in around 2016 and 2017, and they want to cash in on their investment on a block that I used to live on and pay $600 for an apartment. There's now a house for sale for $750,000. It's completely disproportionate to the community that it currently is, and it's going to shift out the Black and brown community that lives there, and they're not going to be able to stay. Taxes are going to go up, rent will increase, and the cost of living is just going to be not feasible for a lot of individuals there. And you're talking about generations that have lived in this neighborhood. And the goal is to bring people from the counties, the suburbs, down to Philly, and to make it this almost unnoticeable location. It's not going to have the feel of the residential community that it has now. It's going to have 95 yoga stores and yoga shops and coffee places with like fancy weird coffees that are $9 a piece. It's not going to have the amazing energy that it has now. But I've been jumping up and down about this for years, and so many people are like, "You're a conspiracy theorist." How? It's
Yeah,
so
that's
very
not good.
blatant.
Look at any city in America
Yeah.
and the neighborhoods that are there, and you will see. And a lot of time, it's like the artists kind of move in because they need cheap places to live. I mean, Chicago, New York, all these cities are like that. And so they kind of set up these like funky artist loft spaces. Then it becomes attractive, and the real estate developers come in. It's almost a mathematical formula of how this works. It's not conspiracy. I mean, it is any city in America. And there's this push pull suburban urban thing that we've seen flux. I'm 55. So all of a sudden, like everyone with resources flees to the suburbs. And then they're like, nah, the city's fucking cool. I want to come back to the city. So then the developer, and then all the problems, problems is a problematic term, but, people who are unresourced get pushed then to the suburbs. It's just this great shift. And probably in 15 years, everyone's going to with resources will run to the suburbs again because they want pools and lawns and all that stuff. But there's no conspiracy to it. I mean, it's just real. I mean, I understand you guys got pushed out of a space.
We did. We had a lease there, and they decided not to renew our lease. That was, again, a calculated move. Being born and raised in Philly, though, I've already seen this happen in South Philly. Now we're seeing it happen in Kensington. Yes, it's all for money. That's where I kind of have stepped back and been like, the wheels are already turning, the train's left the station. But there's a piece that is heartbreaking. It's actually heartbreaking to see the place where you grew up, the families that you grew up next to be displaced. And it's happening. And in order to do it, they had to demonize people who use drugs because they're not pretty to look at. And if they want to bring all the people from New York or the suburbs in, they have to get rid of the unsightly things. And so there's this very aggressive energy towards the people that we serve. So it's very challenging to do the work that we do. It's very challenging to try to support um, with no real resources from the city. And it kind of feels like we're ops now, like you're the opposition when you should be standing alongside us.
Yeah.
This is your city too, but they want to change it. They want the city to shift and change. And a lot of them have been put in there by real estate developers. So it has been a incredibly challenging 12 months, and I only anticipate it getting worse.
Yeah, and I'm sure that's also just the outside larger forces in the country right now. But I mean, a funny thing, not funny, but like there's so many people who use substances in this country, right? I mean, there's a whole like fancy beer and wine culture. That's one thing. But like Ithaca, where Cornell is, there's a reason a lot of drugs come up from New York City. And it's not for the people who are unresourced. It's for the college students. But they have money. They have, families with attorneys. They're going to like be kept out of trouble. Maybe not all of them, because anyone can slip. But for the most part, if you're highly resourced, you're going to be able to get away with using those substances, and no one's going to really look twice at you because you don't sort of look the part. I mean, it's one reason I sort of am public about recovery, because I don't sort of look this part, right? Like I'm 4 kids, professional, go to work every day. Like I don't look like what you think or what you want in your head someone to look like.
Well, I think that's definitely true. And a lot of the work that we do is for people who use socially and recreationally. There's this hierarchy of substances that people have assumed because of the societal imprint. Alcohol is okay. It's fun. It's for dancing and gatherings. And there's an entire propaganda around women and wine. It's 1 o'clock and it's so tacky, and then but it's acceptable. It's completely acceptable. And then there's people on medications like benzos and all these other, amphetamines and things like that. But the moment that you go towards the criminal market, where you go towards heroin, cocaine, meth, there's a stigma around those substances. But this entire drug war is a war on us. It was created. It's a racist war, and it's created to really cause harm to impoverished communities and Black and brown communities. And most of them started out as racist laws. So if you follow the truth of that, and I had to learn this myself, and people used to say this to me, I was like, you guys are making that up. Drugs are bad, okay? And then I started
There's the
learning
egg in
about
the
it.
frying pan. We've seen that. We saw
Yeah,
that
I've
ad.
seen it. I've seen it. I
I'm
know.
that age.
And so a lot of the okay, let's say this, a lot of the issues that I've had with 12-step fellowships, and my message is that I don't think drugs are bad. I think anything in excess can be bad, and I think that anything in moderation can be good. And I don't think that should be this hierarchy of substances. In fact, alcohol has 140,000 related deaths per year, which is more than opiates in general. Um, so I think we do a lot of work to talk about substances. These are what they do. This is what happens when you take them. This is how to consume them safely because we know you can safely consume substances. The unsafe spaces come from sharing supplies, such as syringes. They come from not having an idea of what you're consuming because you're getting it from the criminal drug market. So you can't test it. You don't know what is in that supply. So we advocate for testing your supply. We give out thousands of fentanyl test strips to kids in law school. Like they're huge. The people that are going for the bar, that are doing a bunch of cocaine and meth because it helps them study. That's a huge part of the work we do. We do concerts. We do tons of concerts locally because people do party drugs. They have jobs. They have lives that are going on and it's normal. So people just forget that every day people consume drugs in a different way. Tobacco, caffeine, alcohol, cocaine, they do it all the time. There is a very small percentage of people who have substance use disorder. That is a very, very minimal, I think about 10% of people who consume substances have SUD. And so we've taken that 10% and we've ballooned it and been like, all drugs are bad at all times. You're a bad person if you do this. And I think that narrative needs to change. And I also think that people who use drugs that have substance use disorder need to stop pushing that message on people and saying, if you do drugs, you're going to become addicted, because that's not the case for most people.
Yeah, I always sort of say, largely, I don't care what you do. Don't drive. Like, marijuana legalization in New York is pretty interesting because I'm like, I'm pretty sure you're not supposed to be smoking a joint while you're driving. Pretty sure in the way that you wouldn't have like an open bottle of vodka.
Allegedly.
Allegedly. And, because it is personal choice. Like for me, like I actually have never done anything but alcohol, and alcohol was really medicinal for me. And I knew it didn't work. And so my choice, what works for me and my family, is I don't do anything. I mean, I drink coffee, and probably too much of it, but like that works for me and it works for my family. It's not really my place to judge the impacts on other people. I mean, I judge, sort of to your point, like mommy wine culture and, the sort of some of the origin of this podcast is like daddy beer sport culture. But, back to your point, to the racist war on drugs, I mean, there's such history to that. I mean, the US government was flooding neighborhoods with drugs and then incarcerating people because we make money on prisons. I mean, that is a very real history in this country, and it keeps going.
Yes. Ad nauseum. Ad nauseum. And the messaging keeps going. The prison industrial complex is a monster that must be fed. And in order to feed that monster, they have come up with one of the most, oh God, common practices among humans, which is to do drugs, whether it's alcohol or crack or coke. It doesn't matter. Life is hard and people like to numb out in different ways. And some people, when they numb out, there's a lot of chaotic behaviors and there's a lot of consequences. And then there are other people who get caught in the system. And the system is a system that is not broken. It is working perfectly to the advantage of the 1%. That it is doing what it was built to do, which is to oppress a certain demographic of individuals.
Yeah, which
And
are
so
black
we
and
have
brown
to work
people,
through it.
if we haven't made that point yet.
Yeah,
That's
that's
the point we're
that's
making. Just in case you don't get
exactly.
it, that's what we're saying. And, this is not conspiracy. This is real. The statistics exist on percentage of incarcerated people of color versus their overall population in this country. And it's hugely different, and it ties into the education system. I mean, it does sound like we're nutty, conspiracy thinkers, but we're not. I mean, this is the real deal. There's a lot of people out there who are telling me trees are purple, and they're not, and they're sort of caught up in their own kind of madness, which I think is also problematic right now in this country because it's feeding this weird, I don't even know how to describe, authoritarian thing that we are confusing with freedom. That's like a whole nother a whole nother 20-hour conversation probably, but it all does tie together.
It does, and I think multiple things that should be noted is that the average reading capacity in America is a sixth grade reading level. That's just the average. It's very easy to put propaganda into people's minds. It's very easy to place an imprint into our minds based on what we are consuming daily. And I grew up in a house with no TV. My mom was very staunchly religious. My dad is Middle Eastern and barely spoke English. So I lived in a very small world with my family and learned at a young age to read. We were not allowed to watch television. So when people started saying these things to me, I would read about it. I will actually get a book. I will sit there with a book and I will read it. Okay. I will read research studies from NIH, and I've looked into the actual history, and I will find other sources, not just American sources, because I am very curious about things. And I would encourage anybody that is curious about the war on drugs, about the history of a lot of these things, to read about it. And if you don't have the capacity to read about it, find a podcast that talks about the history of these things and start to understand just how intentional this war on drugs is and the amount of money that is used by American taxpayers to feed this monster and cause immense irreparable harm to Black and Brown communities and across the board deaths overall. The reason that we have these deaths is not because drugs are bad, it is because we have an unregulated drug supply, and that is intentional as well.
Yeah, I think that is a great place to end on. I do want to give you the opportunity. How can folks support your work? And we will link out to that.
Yeah, so you can check out we're on all social medias, Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn. I don't have Facebook, but I believe Savage has a Facebook. And you can visit our website, savagesisters.org. You can donate. You can send to the Amazon wish list. All of the supplies go right back into the street during our outreaches. And just support harm reduction, support the message. And if you are not from Philly, connect with a local organization doing the work. That is the most impact that you can have, is to stay local and to stay relevant to your community.
That's awesome. Sarah, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Thanks for listening. Sober Dad Crew is a DIY project by Stephen Kimball, who writes, edits, and produces the show. To support the show, please review it where you listen to podcasts or visit soberdadcrew.com to buy some merchandise or make a donation.